Google Map improvements for restaurant guests. Would you prefer an electric stovetop in your kitchen? And are restaurants ready to lead with AI? That's all ahead on this week's Digital Restaurant. The Digital Restaurant works like this. We're going to ask each other 5 questions about headlines that affect the worlds of restaurants, off-premise, and technology, but in some way tie back to our book series, Delivering the Digital Restaurant. Are you ready? Let's go. Good morning, Meredith. How are you doing today?
So good, Carl. How are you?
Ho, ho, ho. It's already December. What on earth is going on? This year has whizzed by, has not?
It seems that way.
But Meredith, I'm feeling a little low.
Oh, you
Yeah.
didn't have a good Thanksgiving?
I had a great Thanksgiving. I didn't do anything. I had turkey. I didn't have to worry about any kind of family feuds or anything like that kicking off because it was just us. It was great. My perfect kind of Thanksgiving in that sense. How about you?
It was lovely. It was lovely, but what's making you sad?
I would like us to grow our audience. How about you?
I would take it.
I think it's only fair, right? Like we've been doing this. I don't know whether we celebrated this last time. We've had 75 episodes of the Digital Restaurant. So ever since we got the first book out and we've been talking about all these news stories that have been happening, it's been quite a crazy ride over these last few years.
Indeed.
But I would like us to at least double our audience level. So if you are a fan of us, if you're enjoying the show, we have got a very special festive season favor to ask from you. Please share this wherever you listen to us, whether it's on your podcast, whether you listen to us through LinkedIn, on YouTube. We need you to tell your fans of you about this podcast and why you're a fan of us. If you would do that for us, we would be much appreciated because we'd love to be able to tell you about doubling our audience count before the end of the year. What do you think, Meredith?
It's a bold goal. I love it.
All right. Talking of bold goals, you've got the first question for me this week, and it's all to do with Touch Bistro.
They have come out with a new report on restaurants, and we always love these reports because they're just chock full of data. So share with us what we can learn from Touch Bistro's report.
It's bold, first of all, is because they're talking about 2025. It's amazing. It's like predicting the future. I was like, wow, this is impressive. What is going to happen next year? We're a few weeks away before we do our 2025 predictions, but let's get into this report. They interviewed something like 600 or so operators. And so it's a pretty far-reaching report. I've got a bunch of things. We'll put this in the link so that you can download it through the Touch Bistro website to yourselves, because there's lots of great information in there. I'll touch on a few of them. First up here, optimism remains high. That's great to see. And when you look at some of the elements here of what folks are planning to expand their restaurant business into in 2025, you're seeing catering, events, maybe adding a new location or multiple locations. Even franchising is high on the list. Good to be able to see catering coming back. Obviously, that had a bit of a rough patch a few years ago. We talked about it coming back a bit this year, and it looks like 1 in 2 operators are definitely going to be adding catering as we talk about that in 2025. Let's go down a few pages here to page 15. Strategies implemented to reduce labor costs. On the left here, you'll see they're obviously trying to improve productivity, no surprise. Obviously, they're trying to improve retention, no surprise. Introducing new technology to help address labor costs, also not a huge interesting point there. What is interesting is that only 30% here are using restaurant scheduling software. So when you think about those 400 of the 600 operators speaking, that's crazy that none of them actually are still not using a restaurant scheduling software in some way, because for me, that is a real obvious win to not only improve productivity, retention as well. So that one stood out to me. And then also in terms of alleviating staffing and labor cost concerns, order ahead, QR code payments, and QR code menus. Things that isn't particularly new. I think that's probably a theme that we've talked about a lot this year, is that there isn't as much new stuff, but a lot of the things that we've seen success with are coming back, and certainly things that folks are looking to implement. Let's go down a few more pages here to page 21. I just got to show this because I thought it was funny. Changes in consumer behavior following menu price increases. They're spending less, they're tipping less, they're ordering less alcohol. Shucks, what a surprise. Let's go on. Number 30 on the list here. This one I wanted to share because we don't often spend enough time talking about social media platforms. And what I thought was interesting here is Facebook is still the kind of number one social media platform of choice from at least these operators. 73% of them using Facebook and using that for advertising as well. And what's really interesting is when you look at this here, Instagram, of course, being part of Meta as well, 59, but Twitter, or X as it's now called, 57. Now, Twitter is something you really have to invest into. Typically, when I'm recommending people about social media for restaurants, you're talking about somewhere between 3 and 5 tweets, or whatever they're called these days, a day. And so you're really having to think about the resource you're dedicating into that. Even though they're relatively light, it's important to think about what these particular platforms are going to do for you, because ultimately, it's also about the time and place. The amount of tweets that are going through that system, you have to catch your customer at the exact right moment for that really to land, unless, of course, you're trying to have that digital dialogue we talk about all the time. But look at this here, TikTok, 48%, up from 26 the prior year. So TikTok's still making big gains in spite of some of the regulatory challenges coming their way. All right, let's move on to the main chunk I wanted to touch on here, which was around technology. What a surprise. And when you look at this here, the main thing I thought was interesting was the use of POS integrated platforms versus third-party software. Now, one of the things we've talked about a lot this year has been the growth of vertically integrated platforms, either through consolidation or ones like you've been building yourself. And so when we see what's happened here with 67% of POS integrated software, it shows that is becoming a growing trend, I think. And certainly when you see those that are trying to incorporate a mixture of both, that's at 20, just nearly 20. I think we're going to just see more and more of this, whether it be through acquisition or through these POS companies building new functionality into their platforms.
I interpreted that to mean integrations into the POS. So it still could be a third-party software, but it's something that's available on the platform and has an integration already ready to go. How did you interpret that one?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes that will be obviously the POS itself undertaking those particular features, but I think it's also about the opening up of those integrations to allow POS to incorporate third-party capabilities. We know, though, of course, that building integrations is always a challenge, and so I think my assumption on this is that as we've seen more consolidation happen, that probably allows less integrations being a necessity as it perhaps was a couple of years ago, because there are perhaps fewer platforms out there these days. And then other things here, in terms of the elements of what folks are thinking about when choosing a new POS, look at this, comprehensiveness of the solution being the top one there, 35%. So it shows that if you're in the market for a new POS, having a comprehensive solution is definitely the number one thing, but then also, of course, multi-location management capabilities, making it a good UX, ease of use is up there. Customer support, which I think was pretty high in other reports we've talked about in the past, 26%. So those are really interesting when you then look at price and affordability being a little bit lower down the list, and then also recommendations and reviews being 23%. Certainly a lot of the independent operators I've spoken to often make their decisions around a POS based on what their friends running other restaurants actually use. So seeing that down at 23% there shows that now people perhaps are trying to make a more full decision and not just taking on recommendations as a core part of the decision. Then the last thing I'll just touch on here is this, which we'll go into a little bit later as we go into some of the other questions. But look at this here about the level of tasks that have been automated by restaurateurs. So the blue here are those that have been automated. The orangey red color are those that haven't automated but want to. And the blue is they haven't automated, they don't particularly want to do that. And I think as you look at these just before getting into each specific category, you'll see that most of them have automated a lot of this functionality already. And for those that haven't, they've got some intention to be able to do so in the future. And so when you look at online ordering at 57%, invoicing at 54%, email marketing at 53%, you can see that a lot of these restaurateurs now are embracing the ability to automate a lot of these tasks that perhaps a few years ago weren't even possible for them, or they weren't even aware of the functionality available through their technology provision. So when you see things like accounting, payroll, inventory, staff scheduling, these are all the areas which I always talk about from an AI perspective, the stuff that takes time, keeps your managers in the office. And ultimately, this is the way in which I think we're going to find better productivity for managers. And ultimately, if the managers can get out of that office, they can spend more time with their team, more time with their guests. And I think that's a good thing for everyone. So pretty impressive report, I think, Meredith. I'd encourage everyone to check it out and download it from the Touch Bistro website. Okay, let's go to the second question. My goodness, we came out with this headline some time ago, Ghost Kitchen's dead, and then long live Ghost Kitchens 2.0, something like that. And so we had an article that came out this week about Ghost Kitchens making a comeback. Are they?
A very interesting article in Restaurant Business Online from our friend Joe Guskowski talking about big restaurant chains seem to be using ghost kitchens. And so maybe there is some real life in them. In particular, he's talking about deals that Starbucks, Taco Bell, and Jack in the Box have all set up with cloud kitchens. I know at the Cloud here locally by my house, there is a Starbucks inside of it. In San Francisco, there is a Taco Bell inside of Cloud Kitchen. And apparently there's 2 Jacks in Chicago. I think there's also a Jersey Mike's at a location in New York. I continue to think that as delivery gets bigger and bigger, it only makes sense to have a different kind of format that would support it. But it seems like it's just those that have really big brand power that are making this work for them, either because they're taking substantial delivery volume sort of out of the restaurant where it's messing up operations, or because they have enough brand power that they can pull consumers in digitally to order from them. Very interesting that we're seeing a number of brands make deals with Cloud Kitchen, and it will be really interesting to see if those roll national.
The piece that still seems to resonate with me is that those folks that have got a real estate growth strategy that helps them determine, do I want to have a brick and mortar entity that opens up for customers in the traditional sense, or those that want to deploy their real estate strategy in a way to accommodate their off-premise audiences, and having a really clear identity as to the different profiles, both of the customer set and also as to the locations that work best. If there's a sufficient ghost kitchen provision out there to be able to do it, or if you're going to build one of your own, ultimately that's the right model, I think, going forward. What do you think?
Seems like it. Now, I do think that last bit that you just said, super interesting. Maybe build one of your own. I think what remains to be seen is there really any value in all of these restaurants being co-located together, or would they be better off building their own dark kitchen in the event that they want to put off-premise?
That probably makes most sense for those that do have that size and scale, that have the contracts with all the various different providers to help open one of those things. I think it's smaller entities, it's probably more difficult for them to be able to do that. So having a ready-made solution probably makes it easier.
Okay, your favorite topic, AI. There were a host of articles about restaurants using AI the last 2 weeks, so I stuffed them all in to this question. You can talk to any of them that you might choose.
Yeah, you're right. We'll put the 3 articles in the show notes so that folks can take a look, because they're all really interesting. Restaurants are generally viewed as being behind the curve in terms of technology, right? So the reason we wrote the first book, for goodness sake. And I think that's particularly true for the mom and pops, the independents, or the 1 and 2 operators that make up much of the industry. When the first article, Dr. Nathan Libby mentions that they're up against it, particularly when it comes to AI. And he advocates for them getting together with their management teams and playing around with tools like ChatGPT and Gemini for purposes of inventory management, menu profitability, and retention programs. I don't really agree with that, because you see, these models are built for general usage, and to truly get them to work with deliberate, incisive support, they need to be trained to really help you with something like inventory management, for example. Now, to quote the article, according to McKinsey, use of AI for at least one business function has increased from 33 to 65% in the last year, where retail markets have less than 8% of respondents using AI regularly for work. So that's interesting to see that people are starting to dabble in it and starting to play around with it, which is great. But of those using Gen AI regularly at work, the bulk of the use case is typically for marketing and sales purposes. Now, you see, that does make sense. Why? Because LLMs are built around language first and foremost, right? And so various styles and forms of language can be accommodating in being able to try and craft messages. And of course, as the visuals and the imagery becomes better, that can also become a factor that I think will be supportive. But smaller businesses typically lack the scale or the resources of their chain counterparts, much like we were just talking about in the last question, which makes them slower to adopt to additional practices. The big restaurants, the small restaurants, they should all be thinking about how generative AI can assist their speed and their volume of their sales and marketing practices, for sure. Now, according to the report covered in the first article, we talked about the Touch Bistro thing. There are these 600 or so owner-operators that were surveyed. And in that report, I didn't bring it up, it said 95% of those respondees were using AI in their operations, right? So when we think back to those charts with the blue and the orange, that kind of makes sense. And that's up 90% from those who said so last year. Christopher Pitsley was an operator they quoted in that report, and he said he's been using a chatbot called Chat on AI to help create social media posts for his restaurant. So it's clear that in that context, it really works. He said, because I handle all of our social media, AI has saved me an innumerable amount of time. I feed it in a picture, I tell it to craft me a post, and it does everything else. The only frustration, he said, is that the bot has a bit of a learning curve. It needs to learn your style, and you have to go and teach it what you really want from it. Now, that's really important because that's what many, I think, out there that are really trying to deploy AI into their businesses, especially those trying to build on top of small language models rather, or those that are trying to do retrieval augmented generation. That's a lot of it really around being able to build upon your proprietary set of data and doing it on top of a language model. Anyway, the report goes on to say that most independent operators are happier using it when the guest experience isn't impacted. So I think a lot of the AI focus right now tends to be in the back of the house. And so that's why the most common uses of the technology are in inventory management and menu optimization and reservations and bookings. But I think really what that really comes to the fore here is basically saying these aren't individual operators going on to ChatGPT and doing these things. It's because their technology providers have started to increase more artificial intelligence capability into their products. Now, the second article talks about Joe Park at Yum Brands, and I got a bone to pick with Joe, Meredith, because he described the current AI landscape as being in the MySpace stage. Now, Joe, I talked about things being in the MySpace stage 2 or 3 years ago. Meredith, he's using my line here. He's right. It's absolutely in the MySpace stage. We're not in the Facebook kind of setting right now. But what I really love about what he and Yum are doing is they've got this really deliberate strategic intention for AI. For example, they've partnered with Harvard Business School to educate their top 200 leaders on AI and the digital mindset to really be able to incorporate it into their business. This kind of idea of forward-thinking leadership, ensuring teams have understood the technology's limits and its potential before deploying it. And Meredith, what have we said before about any form of tech and digital transformation thinking? It always starts with having the right mindset. So the standout example for me in the second article is this anecdote about the manager treating AI like a child learning to walk. That was pretty profound, I thought. So by allowing AI to make mistakes, don't forget, much like that operator I mentioned a moment ago in terms of training it for social media, it learned faster. In a way, the mindset is about the collaboration between humans and technology and illustrating that kind of patience and adaptability that's going to be required to succeed with AI. Obviously, Yum's got this broader AI strategy, including their super app for managers, automating food safety checks, shift management, and they use Dragontail, which they acquired some time ago, which is optimizing kitchen operations like almost like a traffic controller or a orchestra conductor for busy periods. These tools, I think, are showing how AI is really solving real operational problems, making kitchens more efficient, food delivery smoother, and ultimately, I think, the customer experience better. And this really, for me, is where it's going. It's not just about treating AI as a tool, like the latest software or SaaS platform to add into the stack. It's about helping businesses make better decisions and allowing the human component of the operation to focus on the things that AI can't touch, like building great teams or affecting the guest experience in the moment. And I think that's really the exciting thing for me, is that if you can get AI to focus on the dull stuff, then it allows the humans to do the things that they do best. And every restaurant, I think, can benefit from that. All right, I'm going to come off I could talk about this for the whole show if you wanted to, but we haven't got time. Let's go on to the next one. And if AI is my favorite subject, then my goodness, are stovetops that are electric one of yours? And an article came out on this one. Tell us about it.
I believe the kitchen of the future will be electric, not gas. And that's a pretty remarkable thing to say because most of the kitchens in the US are, in fact, gas-based. I think we will look back at this era and say, wow, I can't believe we used so much gas in restaurants and had so many line cooks exposed to all of the fumes. Now, this has started to happen in homes already. We've talked before about how Berkeley was the first city to ban gas in new builds. Certainly, you'll see new homes now with induction stovetops. One thing that's very tricky about retrofitting an existing location to electric is that often you need an upgrade in the panel. So you end up upgrading your entire electrical service just to be able to do electric cooking. That's something that most people and most businesses can't really do. So this business Copper, very interesting, because rather than having to upgrade the entire house, it's still pulling the same amount of electricity off the grid, but it's storing it locally in a battery that then, when you're trying to boil water or heat up an oven or do something that requires a lot of energy all at once, it can pull from that battery and get things up to where they need to be. And then it becomes a much lower draw to maintain that heat level on an ongoing basis. Very interesting approach. I had not heard of that one before. And of course, potentially that battery could be used for other things inside your house, maybe allowing you to pull electricity from that battery during peak periods instead of off the grid. Neat innovation happening there. And I think we will continue to see innovation in this space as we work our way toward greater electrification of kitchens, which will enable greater automation of kitchens.
I know you talk about this with your colleagues that design and create kitchens around the industry. With the folks that aren't on your side of the fence on this, why do they say it might not work?
Gas cooking is something that in our culture is very romanticized. Think of the flame, think of the sizzle, think of the association that even we have with gas. We bought our house 10 years ago, and at that time, like, absolutely, you want a gas stove. That's a requirement for a house. It's only been recently that people want an induction cooktop. That's a big shift. And I think reflects that we've all been trained that the flame is better. It's going to take a while to undo.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And finally, wow, Google Maps enhanced search quite a bit, and in a way that I think is pretty novel for restaurant discovery. Tell us about it.
Last time you were at a hotel, Meredith, and you were with Scott and you were in a location that you didn't know where you were going to go, did you go up to the concierge? Did you go up to the concierge and say any recommendations for dinner?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So me too. I often find that not only do they get you in somehow when it's perhaps a little difficult to do it if you're trying to do it through OpenTable, the benefit more often than not is that they've been to those restaurants and they get it. Now, why am I sharing that? Google Maps is integrating an advanced AI feature using Gemini to enhance the user interactions and provide a more personalized experience. And these updates are aiming to transform how users are going to discover and engage with restaurants and other local businesses. Now, what does that mean? They could be saying things like, are reservations recommended? Or is there indoor seating? And the AI processes that query this deliver precise context-aware answers, streamlining the information gathering process. It can provide also immersive view for routes. When I was in Japan recently, my goodness, trying to find where the actual restaurant front door was a challenge. Whereas with this, I can actually help you be able to make sure you're finding exactly the right way into the place of where you're wanting to dine. I think the other piece of this is that it just creates that personalized experience, right? So if you can actually help a customer understand the type of experience they want, let's say, I don't know, you and I were going out to have lunch and we wanted a quiet place to talk about the next great show we're putting on. It would be really frustrating for us if we turned up to a place with really loud music and there's a whole bunch of kids around just shouting. It wouldn't be the place that we had hoped for, right? And if we had engaged with something like Google Search or Google Maps, to be able to ask that question, to be able to say, I'm looking for a restaurant, I've got an important business meeting, it needs to be quiet, calm, somewhere where we can have a professional conversation. That type of experience is fantastic for guests because it's informing better decision making, it's feeling a bit more personalized, and it allows you to almost plan a little bit more efficiently. And for me, it just creates that kind of same experience as you might get if you are asking an actual concierge. Of course, for restaurants, it helps them also enhance their visibility. It helps them be transparent with their operations. And ultimately, it creates the right customer engagement up front. So you don't get those points of frustration that perhaps are subliminal in the guest experience, but you avoid that from ever happening. So you can actually be who you want to be for the guests that want to have the experience that you're putting on. So yeah, I think this is super exciting. And it's really interesting to see how this seamless integration of Gemini is starting to roll into the restaurant guest experience.
Yeah, it's so cool. They have all the data, right? They often will rate restaurants on how noisy is it or how expensive is it or what kind of cuisine is it. They have all these different types of data existing. But as a consumer today, in the old days, I guess, I would have to go to each restaurant individually and I would have to look at those ratings and see, and maybe I would read some of the reviews and see what other people said, which is all now unstructured data, a huge pain to have to go through. But AI can just look through 50 restaurants at once, all of those data points and all of that unstructured data, and answer exactly the question that I have. So I thought it was very exciting. I can't wait to use it.
Yeah. And I think the way it's really going to come to life more than anything is through voice, right? So you think about the Alexa experience or the Google experience today from your Google Home. The thing that's really coming to life, certainly I've noticed it with ChatGPT's chat interface, is the latency is so fast. And so you're not actually having any kind of level of inertia. It's almost like you're having a conversation. So now transfer that into your car, for example, where you're trying to find somewhere, or transfer it into your phone or somewhere where you're on the move and you don't want to be typing something in. That I think is going to really help it. Now, imagine you get to a situation like that where the kiosks of the future are also taking that same thing into account, right? You can imagine all the different contexts of how this can perhaps play out beyond just a Google Map experience. So yeah, lots to be excited about on that front too.
Yeah.
All right. We are out of time. It's a busy week as ever, but hopefully you guys are going to have some thoughts yourselves. Please put them below in the comments. Is your next stove going to have a battery? Where are you taking AI? And what about ghost kitchens? Is 2025 going to have a ghost kitchen in your future? Do let us know. And if you've got any articles that you'd like us to cover on the next edition, as we get closer to the final festive episode of The Digital Restaurant, please let us know. But until next time, thanks for listening. The Digital Restaurant Podcast is available for you to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Watch us, rate us, and subscribe to The Digital Restaurant on YouTube, and follow along on all our social media digital restaurant channels. Thanks for listening.